Hello, this is Morale Bernard, reading from The Slaver, celebrating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. It is his memorial. So, looking at the slaver, the story of the slaver, and celebrating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, it is his memorial. The capture of a slaver. From 1830 to 1850, both Great Britain and the United States, by joint convention, kept on the coast of Africa at least 80 guns afloat for the suppression of the slave trade. Most of the vessels so employed were small corvettes, brigs, or schooners. Steam at that time was just being introduced into the navies of the world. Nearly 50 years ago, I was midshipman on the United States brig Porpoise of 10 guns. And some of you may remember these little 10-gun coffins, as many of them proved to be to their crews. The Porpoise was a fair sample of the type, a full-rigged brig of 130 tons, heavily sparred, deep-waisted, and carrying a battery of 824 pounds carronades and 2 long chasers, so wet that even in a moderate breeze or sea it was necessary to batten down, and so tender that she required careful watching. Only 5 feet between decks, her quarters were necessarily cramped and uncomfortable, and as far as possible we lived on deck. With a crew of 80 all told, Lieutenant Thompson was in command, Lieutenant Bucket, executive officer, and 2 midshipmen were the line officers. She was so slow that we could hardly hope for a prize except by a fluke. Repeatedly, we had chased suspicious craft only to be outsailed. At this time, the traffic in slaves was very brisk. The demand in the Brazils, in Cuba, and in other Spanish West Indies was urgent, and the profit of the business so great that 2 or 3 successful ventures would enrich anyone. The slavers were generally small, handy craft, fast, of course, usually schooner-rigged, and carrying flying topsails and forecourse. Many were built in England or elsewhere purposefully for the business, without, of course, the knowledge of the builders, ostensibly as yachts or traders. The Spaniards and Portuguese were the principal offenders, with occasionally an English-speaking renegade. The slave depots, or barracoons, were generally located some miles up a river. Here the slaver was secure from capture and could embark his live cargo at his leisure, keeping a sharp lookout on the coast. The dealers were able to follow the movements of the cruisers and, by means of smoke or in other ways, signal when the coast was clear for the coming down the river and sailing of the loaded craft. Before taking in the cargoes, they were always fortified with all the necessary papers and documents to show they were engaged in legitimate commerce. So it was only when caught in flagrant delicto that we could hold them. We had been cruising off the coast of Liberia, doing nothing, when we were ordered to the Gulf of Guinea to watch the Bonny and Cameroon's mouths of the great Niger River. Our consort was H.M. Schooner Bright, a beautiful craft about our tonnage, but with half our crew, and able to sail 3 miles to our 2. She was an old slaver, captured and adapted as a cruiser. She had been very successful, making several important raptures of full cargoes, and twice or thrice a commanding officer and others had been promoted. Working our way slowly down the coast in company with the bride, we would occasionally send a boat on shore to reconnoiter or gather any information we could from the natives through our crewman interpreter. A few glasses of rum or a string of beads would loosen the tongue of almost anyone. At Little Bonny, we heard that two vessels were some miles up the river, ready to sail, and were only waiting until the coast was clear. Captain James of the Bright thought that one, if not both, would sail from another outlet of the river about 30 miles to the southward, and determined to watch it. We both stood to that direction. Of course, we were watched from the shore, and the slavers were kept posted as to our movements. They supposed we had both gone to the Cameroons, leaving Little Bonny open. But after dark, with a light land breeze, we wore round and stood to the northward, keeping offshore some distance so that captains leaving the river might have sufficient offing to prevent their reaching port again or beaching their craft. At daybreak, as far as we could judge, we were about 20 miles offshore to the northward and westward of Little Bonny, in the track of any vessel bound for the West Indies. The night was dark, with occasional rain squalls, when the heavens would open and the water come down in a flood. Anxiously, we all watched for daylight, which comes under the equator with a suddenness very different from the prolonged twilight of higher latitudes. At the first glimmer in the east, every eye was strained on the horizon, all eager, all anxious to be the first to sight anything within our vision. The darkness soon gave way to grey morn. Day was dawning, when suddenly a crewman by my side seized my hand and, without saying a word, pointed inshore. I looked, but could see nothing. All eyes were focused in that direction, and in a few minutes the faint outline of a vessel appeared against the sky. She was some miles inshore of us, and as the day brightened we made her out to be a brigantine, an uncommon rig in those days, standing across our bows, with all studding sails set on the starboard side. Indeed, everything that could pull, including water sails and save all. We were on the same tack, heading to the northward. We set everything that would draw, and kept off 2 points, bringing the wind abeam so as to head her off. The breeze was light, and off the land. We had not yet been seen against the darker western horizon, but we knew it could only be a few minutes longer before their sharp eyes would make us out. Soon we saw the studding sails and all kites come down by the run, and their yards braced up sharp on the same track as ours. We also hauled by the wind. At sunrise she was 4 points on our weather bow, distant about 4 miles. We soon perceived that she could outsail our brig, and if the wind held, would escape. Gradually, she drew away from us until she was hull down. Our only hope now was that the land breeze would cease and the sea breeze come in. As the sun rose, we gladly noticed the wind lessening, until at 11 o'clock it was calm. Not a breath ruffled the surface of the sea. The sun's ray in the zenith were reflected as from a mirror. The waters seemed like molten lead. I know of nothing more depressing than a calm in the tropics, a raging sun overhead, around an endless expanse of Dead Sea, and a feeling of utter helplessness that is overpowering. What if this should last? What a fate! The rhyme of the ancient mariner comes to our mind. Come storm and tempest, come hurricanes and blizzards, anything but an endless stagnation. For some hours we watched earnestly the horizon to the westward, looking for the first dark break on the smooth sea. Not a cloud was in the heavens. The brig appeared to be leaving us either by towing or by sweeps. Only her top-gallant sail was above the horizon. It looked as if the sea breeze would desert us. It usually came in about 1 o'clock, but that hour and another had passed, and yet we watched for the first change. Without a breeze, our chances of overhauling the stranger were gone. Only a white speck, like the wing of a gull, now marked her whereabouts on the edge of the horizon. And in another hour she would be invisible, even from the masthead. When we were about to despair, our head crewman drew the captain's attention to the westward and said the breeze was coming. We saw no signs of it, but his quick eye had noticed light, feather-like clouds rising to the westward, a sure indication of the coming breeze. Soon we could see the glassy surface ruffled at different points as the breeze danced over it, coming on like an advancing line of skirmishers. And as we felt its first gentle movement in our parched faces, it was welcome indeed, putting new life into all of us. The crew needed no encouragement to spring to their work. As the little brig felt the breeze and gathered stairway, she was headed for the chase, bringing the wind on her starboard quarter. In less than 5 minutes, all the studding sail that would draw were set, as well as everything that would pull. The best quartermaster was sent to the wheel with orders to keep the chase directly over the weather end of the spritsail yard. The captain ordered the sails wet, an expedient I never had much faith in unless the sails are very old. But as if to recompense us for the delay, the breeze came in strong and steady. Our one hope was to follow it up close, and to carry it within gunshot of the brig, for if she caught it before we were within range, she would certainly escape. All hands were piped to quarters, and the long 18-pounder on the forescape was loaded with a full-service charge. On this piece we relied to cripple the chase. We were now rapidly raising her, and I was sent aloft on the fore topsail yard with a good glass to watch her movements. Her hull was in sight, and she was still becalmed, though her head was pointed in the right direction, and everything was set to catch the coming breeze. She carried a boat on each side of the davits like a man of war, and I reported that I could make out men securing them. They had been towing her, and only stopped when they saw us drawing near. Anxiously we watched the breeze on the water as it narrowed the sheen between us, and we were yet 2 miles or more distant when she first felt the breeze. As she did so, we hoisted the English blue ensign. For the fleet at this time was under a rear admiral of the blue, and fired a weather gun, but no response was made. Fortunately, the wind continued to freshen, and the porpoise was doing wonderfully well. We were rapidly closing the distance between us. We fired another gun, but no attention was paid to it. I noticed from the movements of the crew of the brig that they were getting ready for some manoeuvre, and reported to the captain. He divined at once what the manoeuvre would be. and ordered the braces be led along, hands by the studding sail halyards and tacks, and everything ready to haul by the wind. We felt certain now of the character of our friend, and the men were already calculating the amount of their prize money. We were now within range, and must clip her wings if possible. The first lieutenant was ordered to open fire with an 18-pounder. Carefully, the gun was laid, and as the order "fire" was given, down came our English flag, and the top of the stars and stripes was broken at the gaff. The first shot touched the water beam of the chase, and ricocheted ahead of her. She showed the Spanish flag. The captain of the gun was ordered to elevate a little more and try again. The second shot let daylight through her fore topsail, but the third was wide again. Then the sharp, quick order of the captain, "Fore topsail, yard there, come down and decks her," brought me down on the run. "Have both cutters cleared away and ready for lowering?" were my orders as I reached the quarter-deck. Practice from the bow chasers continued, but the smoke that drifted ahead of us interfered with the accuracy of the firing, and no vital part was touched, though a number of shots went through her sails. The captain in the main rigging never took his eye from the Spaniard, evidently expecting that as a fox, when hard pressed, doubles on the hounds, the chase would attempt the same thing. And he was not disappointed, for when he had come within easy range of her, the smoke hid her from view for a few minutes, and as it dispersed, the first glimpse showed the captain that her studding sails had all gone, and that she had hauled by the wind, standing across our weather bow. Her captain had lost no time in taking in his studding sails. Halyards, tacks, and sheets had all been cut together and dropped overboard. It was a bold and well-executed manoeuvre, and we could not help admiring the skill with which she was handled. However, we had been prepared for this move. "Ease down your helm. Lower away. Haul down the studding sails. Ease away the weather braces. Brace up. Trim down the head sheets," were the orders which followed in rapid succession, and were as quickly executed. The Spaniard was now broad on our lee bow, distant not more than half a mile. But as she felt the wind which we brought down, she fairly spun through the water, exposing her bright copper. She was both head-reaching and outsailing us. In half an hour she would have been right ahead of us, and in an hour the sun would be down. It was now or never. We could bring nothing to bear except the gun on the forecastle. Fortunately, it continued smooth, and we were no longer troubled with smoke. Shot after shot went hissing through the air after her. A number tore through the sails or rigging, but not a spar was touched nor an important rope cut. We could see some of her crew, aloft, reeving and stopping braces, and ready to repair any damage done, working as coolly under fire as old man-of-war's men. But while we were looking down came the gaff of the mainsail, and the gaff topsail fell all adrift. A lucky shot had cut her peak halyards. Our crew cheered with a will. "Well done, Hobson! Try it again," called the captain to the boatswain mate, who was captain of the gun. After the next shot, the topgallant yard swayed for a few minutes and fell forward. The order was given to cease firing. She was at our mercy. We were rapidly nearing the chase when she backed her topsail. We kept off, and when within easy range of the carronades, hove to windward. Lieutenant Bucket was ordered to board her in the first cutter and take charge. I followed in the second cutter, with orders to bring the captain on board with his papers. A few strokes sent us alongside of a brig about our tonnage, but with a low rail and a flush deck. The crew, some 18 or 20 fine-looking seamen, were forward eagerly discussing the situation of affairs. The captain was aft with his two officers, talking to Lieutenant Bucket. He was fair, with light hair curling all over his face, beard cut short, about 40 years of age, well set up with a frame like a Roman wrestler, evidently a tough customer in a rough and ready skirmish. He spoke fairly good English, and was violently denouncing the outrage done to his flag. His government would demand instant satisfaction for firing upon a legitimate trader on the high seas. I have the Lieutenant Captain Thompson's orders to bring the captain and his papers on board at once. His harangue was cut short by orders to get on board my boat. He swore with a terrible oath that he would never leave his vessel. "Come on board, men," said I, and 20 of our crew were on the deck in a jiffy. I stationed my coxswain, Parker, at the cabin companionway with orders to allow no one to pass. "Now," said Lieutenant Bucket to the Spaniard, "I will take you on board in iron unless you go quietly." He hesitated a moment, then said he would come as soon as he had gone below to bring up his papers. "No, never mind your papers, I will find them," said the lieutenant, for he saw the devil in the Spaniard's eyes and knew he meant mischief. Our captive made one bound for the companionway, however, and seizing Parker by the throat, hurled him into the waterways as if he had been a rag baby. But fortunately he slipped on a small grating and fell on his knees, and before he could recover himself, 2 of our men threw themselves upon him. I closed the companionway. The struggle was desperate for a few minutes, for the Spaniard seemed possessed of the furies, and his efforts were almost superhuman. Twice he threw the men from him across the deck, but they were reinforced by Parker, who, smarting under his discomfiture, rushed in, determined to down him. I was anxious to end it with my pistol, but Lieutenant Bucket would not consent. The Spaniard's officers and men made some demonstration to assist, but they were quickly disposed of. His 2 mates were put in irons and the crew driven forward, struggling, fighting, every limb and every muscle at work. The captain was overpowered. A piece of the signal halyards brought his hands together, and handcuffs were slipped on his wrist. Only then he succumbed and begged Lieutenant Bucket to blow out his brains, for he had been treated like a pirate. Without doubt, if he had reached the cabin, he would have blown up the vessel, for in a locker over the transom were 2 open kegs of powder. I led him to my boat, assisted him in, and returned to the Porpoise. As soon as the Spaniard reached the deck, the captain ordered his irons removed and expressed his regret that it had been necessary to use force. The prisoner only bowed and said nothing. The captain asked him what his cargo consisted of. He replied, "About 400 blacks bound to the Brazils." I was then ordered to return to the brig, bring on board her crew, leaving only the cook and steward, and to take charge of the prize, as Lieutenant Bucket, our first lieutenant, was not yet wholly recovered from an attack of African fever. The crew of 20 men, when brought on board, consisted of Spaniards, Greeks, Malays, Arabs, white and black, but had not one Anglo-Saxon. They were ironed in pairs and put under guard. From the time we got on board, we had heard moans, cries, and rumblings coming from below. And as soon as the captain and crew were removed, the hatches had been taken off, when there arose a hot blast as from a charnel house, sickening and overpowering. In the hold were 300 or 400 human beings, gasping, struggling for breath, dying, their bodies, limbs, faces, all expressing terrible suffering. In their agonizing fight for life, some had torn or wounded themselves or their neighbours dreadfully. Some were stiffened in the most unnatural positions. As soon as I knew the condition of things, I sent the boat back for the doctor and some whisky. It returned, bringing Captain Thompson, and for an hour or more we were all hard at work lifting and helping the poor creatures on deck, where they were laid out in rows. A little water and stimulant revived most of them. Some, however, were dead, or too far gone to be resuscitated. The doctor worked earnestly over each one, but 17 were beyond human skill. As fast as he pronounced them dead, they were quickly dropped overboard. Night closed, with our decks covered so thickly with the ebony bodies that with difficulty we could move about. Fortunately, they were as quiet as so many snakes. In the meantime, the first officer, Mr. Block, was sending up a new top-gallant yard, revving new rigging, repairing the sails, and getting everything au tanto aloft. The crewmen were busy washing out and fumigating the hull, getting ready for our cargo again. It would have been a very anxious night, except that I felt relieved by the presence of the brig, which kept within hail. Soon after daybreak, Captain Thompson came on board again, and we made a count of the captives as they were sent below. 188 men and boys, 166 women and girls. Seeing everything snug and in order, the captain returned to the brig, giving me final orders to proceed with all possible dispatch to Monrovia, Liberia, land the Negroes, then sail for Puerto Praya, Cape de Verde Islands, and report to the Commodore. As the brig hauled to the wind and stood to the southward and eastward, I dipped my colours when a crew jumped into the rigging and gave us 3 chairs, which we returned. Oh, right. So, the story of the slaver. Join me, maybe once again, for another story. Join me for another story, celebrating the life, thinking about the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King and his life work in the area of civil rights and justice. See you then, Morale saying bye for now.